Harnock, and I'm a policy analyst with New America, the education policy program. We're based in Washington, D.C. We're here tonight in partnership with our New America New York offices. And my work focuses specifically on multilingual learners, so my research and writing is on that, and I'm the author of a report that we recently published called From Blueprint to Building, Lifting the Torch for Multilingual Students in New York State. So English language learners are the fastest growing subgroup of primary and secondary K-12 schools. One in 5 students of all students speak a language other than English at home, and this translates into around 1 in 10 students who are classified as English at school. Many of these students' families are migrating and settling in historic entry points to the country like New York, like Texas and California. They're also coming to new frontiers of integration. So new districts are grappling really for the first time with these changing demographics. I experienced this as a former teacher in Baltimore City in a changing community where half my students spoke Spanish at home. These multilingual learners, far from being a burden, are a national resource that public leaders are wise to invest in now. Since 1990, all population growth from children ages 0 to 8 has been children of immigrants. So these diverse children represent our country's future, our future workers, future taxpayers, and future public leaders. So these students are assets, but they come with unique needs that policymakers and educators need to be responsive to. We're going to get into some concrete policy, but at the core of this, it's really about big ideas of grappling with changing communities, diversity, and what equal opportunity means. So in this national context, New York State has really emerged as a leader for multilingual students. In some ways, this is not surprising because longer history of working with these students, and New York is generally a more progressive political context. But New York is also grappling with change, particularly in upstate districts and Hudson Valley districts that are grappling with growing numbers of these students and a growing diversity of languages represented. So New York as well is having to respond to these changes. Recently, in light of this and diversifying population, New York State's Department of Education made a sweeping number of changes to how they're educating their multilingual students. In April 2014, they released the Blueprint for English Language Learner Success, which is really an articulated mission statement and vision for where they want to go with these students. They reframed these students to see their linguistic diversity as a strength. And under the Blueprint banner, after that blueprint was released, and we have copies of the blueprint here tonight as well, after that blueprint was released, they then, the State Board of Regents passed new rules. So this was legal teeth to back up the big vision of the blueprint, meaning that these are mandated changes. The new rules are holistic and extensive, so I'm just going to highlight 3 major highlights of New York's new strategy for other leaders and advocates to learn from, both bright spots and some of the emerging challenges. So first, New York is in these students' bilingualism through dual language instructional models. Research suggests that dual language or bilingual models are as effective or more effective in closing achievement gaps in English for these learners, which is nothing of the cultural and economic benefit of raising bilingual people. New York has expanded what was already a very unique bilingual mandate from the school level to the level. So the new rule is that if there are 20 or more English learners of the same language background at the same grade across the district now is mandated to open a bilingual dual language instructional program. Beyond this mandate, New York is also moving to build a larger ecosystem to foster. In general, they have established a seal of biliteracy for high school graduates to earn. They've translated their math curriculum into 5 different languages and put that on. They've also issued startup grants to help districts that are launching bilingual or dual language instructional models for the first time. So leaders in New York really see dual default, but at the same time, there are limits to this strategy because there's a number of bilingual teachers, there's a limited number of a limited supply of bilingual material. It's not just Spanish, it's other languages as well. So the reality is that most of these students will continue to receive instruction in English for the foreseeable future. So leaders saw models of English language instruction as well. So that's the second key from New York's approach, is that they are integrating academic core content with their English language services. Historically, services for these students have had students leaving the classroom, being pulled out to be serviced in another setting. Under the new rules, there's a mandate of a co-teaching integrated model, where another teacher is coming into the classroom who is a specialist in language acquisition, coming into the classroom to co-teach with the mainstream teacher. And that is, so there's a gradient of expectations that are set, so it's a hybrid approach of both the pull-out and co-teaching integrated format for students that are at a higher level of English. Language learners, but they're at a higher level of English, they get more time in the co-teaching model. For that are at a lower level, they get more time being pulled out in the standalone model. There are challenges to this approach, this integrated co-teaching approach that New York. There's scheduling to coordinate at the school level. There's coordinating between teachers. Some of the teachers that I spoke with said it can sometimes feel like an arranged marriage, where sometimes it clicks and sometimes it doesn't. So there's a lot to consider in rolling it out at the school level. From a district perspective, it's also there's a real human capital and funding challenge. You to have more, if you're team teaching, that requires more teachers, and that requires more. So a lot of districts have been grappling with this model from a funding perspective as well. So in addition to the dual language bilingual vision and this integrated teaching language development, the third piece that I want to highlight of New York's approach is that they are really pushing to build system and leadership capacity at all levels. So teacher leaders, school leaders, and district leaders getting on the same page about what they want to achieve for these students. So it's really about changing culture and sharing the responsibility for the education of these students. And I think that really starts with the blueprint that New York put out, which serves as an anchor point and a reference point. The first principle of the blueprint is all teachers of ELLs. The second one is that all school board, district, and school leaders are responsible for ELL success. So the new rules also mandate training for all classroom teachers, not just the specialists. All classroom teachers have to get training on how to work with these students, as well as administrators. New York has also worked with state universities University to roll out MOOCs, online free courses to help develop their district level leadership. On the same page about this big vision and the new rules. And so I spoke to superintendents and different leaders, and ones that I spoke to, many of them said that these rules and these resources are really changing and integrating the district culture. So the superintendent at the Hampton Bays district on Long Island, it's caused his district to rethink how they're structuring services for these learners. He said, to guard against a tale of two Hampton Bays, two tracks where one hallway serves one group of kids and another hallway serves another. So the goal here is really to unify the conversation. It cannot just be the responsibility of those teachers over there. It has to be a shared responsibility. So taken together, these changes that New York is attempting are promising. They represent a research-based, cohesive strategy for these students, and it's driven by bold bilingual leaders themselves at the state level. Starting at the top with the first ever Latino Board of Regents Chancellor, Betty Rosa. Changes are still unfolding, and that's why I titled the report From Blueprint to Building. New York is really at a pivot stage where they're moving from these great ideas and they're trying to now do the greater lift of implementing them and implementing them well. One key piece that New York really needs, and I know is considering, but needs to consider to think about, is linking these changes, which only affect kindergarten through 12, grades 12, linking that to changes in the early years, because there's a strong body of research showing how important early education is for these students. So I think that will be a critical next step for New York, is linking this system to pre-K and early education offerings. Overall, New York's example is a key one. Just in closing, we're in the centralized environment, obviously, around newcomers. And so I think there's going to be really two of conversations that are both very important. The first is more of a watchdog conversation, where the community of people that care about multilingual students is vigilant and sober-minded about protecting these students' civil rights. And I think the other conversation that is having is to stay focused on solutions and the policy levers that we can pull for these students to drive equity for these students. That's why I think it's so important that we elevate hopeful, if imperfect, examples like New York State and try to learn from them and to try to build on what they're doing. So with that, over to Sarah Garland, who is the executive editor at the Hechinger Report. And she is going to introduce our panelists. Thank you so much.
Great to be here today. I'm from the Hechinger Report. We're a nonprofit journalism organization that writes about education. Our focus is on inequality and innovation. So this sort of the nexus of those two issues that we're covering. And first I'll introduce the panel and then we'll get into questions. With us we have Angelica Infante-Green, who is the Deputy Commissioner of the New York Department's Office of Instructional Support, which oversees bilingual education and world language, data systems and educational technology assessment, curriculum instruction, special education, to the Office of District and School Review. So just a tiny job she's got there. In her previous role as the Associate Commissioner for Bilingual Education and World Languages, she spearheaded the release of the Blueprint for English Language Learners' Success, which is the statewide framework that Janie was talking about, that establishes expectations for administrators, policymakers, and practitioners to prepare English language for academic success. We have Zoila Morel, who used to be Zoila Tazi, She is an associate professor at Mercy College in the Department of Educational Leadership. She has over 25 years of experience working with children and families, including as the director of a Head Start program, a family literacy program, and as a school principal. Dr. Morel obtained a doctoral degree in urban education at the Graduate Center of City University of New York, and her dissertation studied the effects of bilingual instruction on the emergent literacy skills of Spanish-speaking preschool children. In 2015, she was one of 10 educators nationwide selected by Big Picture Learning for the Deeper Learning Fellowship, and she's currently researching bilingual education in early childhood, school readiness, and conditions for Latino children. And then finally we have Roberto Padilla, who is superintendent of the Newburgh Enlarged City School District in Newburgh. Previously, he was a teacher and a principal in New York City. He's widely recognized for his leadership in turning around failing schools and supporting school district leaders both nationally and internationally to change leadership. He was a Deeper Equity Fellow and was appointed to Harvard University's Principal Center's Advisory Board, where he had a 4-year term, and he got his doctorate from Fordham. I'm excited to be here today to talk about what New York is doing differently to serve English learners. And that includes, just to be clear, that we're talking about immigrant students, but also kids who are born speaking another language at home as their primary language. At the Hechinger Report, we've done coverage and had a focus area, particularly in the past year and a half, on this growing population. It's about 9% of students nationally, how they're faring. And national publication, we've done a lot of work in New York, as Angelica can maybe attest to. We've bugged her with that. And we've looked at how New York is trying to ramp up standards and at the same time achievement gaps. And there are some really big ones here in New York. About 4% of English learners English exams last year, and 11% passed math exams. But the state is going farther than just about any other to improve the outcomes for these students, including shifting from this view of English learners as somehow deficient because they don't speak English. Start off with talking about how that happened. Then I'm going to ask the panelists to talk about what the changes mean and some of the challenges that remain. And I think we have until about 7:30. Someone can flag me if that's and then we'll switch over to questions from you. The first question is going to come from, we have a New York State Regent here, Luis Reyes, but we'd like you to start thinking about your own questions and then we'll turn it over for about half an hour to hear from you. But our first question is from Angelica. I wanted to ask you first why New York took this leap to make a statewide policy for English learners that by all accounts goes farther than what any other state has done. And tell us a little bit also, if there are folks out there from other states, what obstacles you encountered, politically or educationally or both, and I think also for leaders here in New York City, it would be interesting to hear how you dealt with those obstacles or thought about those obstacles.
Sure. So the need comes from what we see every day, right? The kids are not getting the services or the supports that they need to be able to be successful. And that's a challenge. I say that because we're probably with the most inappropriate tools, right? So it's a double-edged sword, but at the same time, it's the tools that we have, and we want our kids to be successful. So things that needed to be in place for that to happen. So we started looking at that, and one of the, a couple of the things that we did is that we went to schools that were successful, who were beating the odds with these kids, and what were they doing? It's very, as a policy, somebody that works with policy and works as an administrator, sometimes we create things that are not real on the ground. So we wanted to create it from the ground up. So we went to schools and we looked at what were they doing, what were the key factors that made this change, that ensured that these kids were graduating, were meeting the standards, and what we found was everything that's in our blueprint. Really it's a whole school approach, not just one teacher off the ESOL teacher taking the kids to a corner or a room, but really a whole approach around this. And the bottom line is the home language, the value that it has with everyone, right? And then we would get teachers that would say, but I don't speak that language. You don't have to speak that language to be in the classroom and make it alive every day. And those are kind of the things that we were talking about, but also really, how do we really ramp up bilingual education in the state of New York? And that we from kindergarten, but also in terms of high school. What did that look like? And also, the things that you would think would be controversial that we've done were not, but other things were. And I'll tell you what has been the most controversial for us. It's really not having 4 grade levels. So people are really upset about that. And when I say 4 grade levels, so there's traditionally teachers would either bring kids to the classroom, and they would have 4th, 5th, 6th graders together. Or K1, I even saw 4th and 5th. How? How does that pedagogically sound? That you would, no one would allow that for their own child. And what are we teaching? So I think we've gotten a lot of pushback with that. Then it becomes a conversation about what makes sense, where do you find teachers, and those are challenges. Those are real challenges, and we don't want to dismiss them because they are real and they exist. However, we have to start building a system that builds expectations of what we need. So this sent a message to higher ed. We sent a letter to higher ed telling them very specifically, we don't need any more common branch teachers, right? Because they are unemployed. We need ESOL teachers. We need lingual teachers. We need teachers that understand this population. We need you to really understand where we're going in the state. So we approached it from the blueprint, but really put in the regulations. And was it controversial? To some degree. I think a lot of people, we're lucky in New York State because we have a lot of advocates. We have a lot of educators. We have our Board of Regent member here, Regent Reyes, who's been doing this work for a very long time. So this is a state that really understands and has also been used to fighting, right? Like we're fighters. If you're, we're going, Trump has a long battle, right? Because we're ready. So for us, it just made sense. We looked at what worked and we did. Engage the community. I think that was the most important part, was engaging and doing this work in the community. I think where it's exciting for us is that we're going to see the fruits of these changes 4 years from now. Unfortunately, the kids that are graduating this year will not be benefiting from a lot of the changes. But one of the things, I'll tell you two very quick anecdotes. I went to Utica. Yes, there are ELLs in Utica, multilingual learners. And they were team teaching. And team teaching is not easy. You guys know that. It is like a marriage. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I'd say to principals and superintendents, start with the easiest people. Put the most difficult teacher as the first model. It's not how you do this. But this classroom, I sat down, and at the end of the classroom, I didn't know who the ESOL teacher was and the science teacher was. This is a high school. When I sat down and I talked to them, I said, well, why are you doing this? And it was a very simple answer. Well, what kind of supports would these kids have otherwise? But the 2 periods that they're with me, then what? How would they understand their chemistry lesson? Very simple answer. Very simple. So has it been easy? No, it's a mind shift. It's a mind shift for the ESOL teacher, it's a mind shift for the content area teacher. It's not the ESOL teacher coming into my classroom, it's our classroom. So it's a whole time. It's not easy. And you asked about the resistance. Money is part of the conversation, right? It is a conversation that we continue to. But I think part of that is also being creative. furious. Oh, I'm going to have to hire 22 new teachers because of you. Because of me, or because you have more population in your team. You know, so we have to work on language. And so he says, hey, come to my office and we'll sit down. They needed 1.5 new. Because they were thinking about it in the same way. Scheduling is not an easy thing, it's an art. Anyone that does it knows that that's true. But you have to think out of the box. Today, that superintendent who really wanted to kill me is one of our biggest supporters. Because the bottom line is that if a child is saying 7 years, which our kids do stay, there is an impact financially, either at the end or at the beginning. So we need to put it forth at the very beginning so that we have the results that we want and we support the kids that are part of our district.
No, that's great. No, that you touched on some things that we'll get back to a little too. But I want to now turn to Roberto for you to talk to us about, put on your journalist in a picture for us. What is it like day to day to be dealing with these new regulations? And if I'm the parent of an English learner student, what would my child's like now in one of your schools versus the way it was before? And really, like, what are some real concrete examples of how things are different?
So thank you for having me and for having us. Welcome. So let me just start by saying I was not one of those superintendents that called me. In fact, I'm one of the biggest. And that's because for far too long, as a teacher or when I was a principal and now as a superintendent, one of the things that I felt has lacked was a true vision around how we educate children who speak another language. And I would say for the first time in a very long time, we have a real vision behind it now. And so that's comforting for me to know that there's true vision, there's regulations now to support this work. So how do we make it happen? How do we make it work in our classrooms every single day? So I'm joined this evening by two colleagues from my district, Ms. Chastity Beato, who's our director of education, and one of our phenomenal teachers, Ms. Marie Short. I was going to call them out, but they deserve just as much recognition for this work because they're the people on the ground making it happen. So to one of the points that Angelica made around of co-teaching, right? So as any of our parents come in to understand our programs and how we go about instructing children, this is new. This is very again, far too long, students were pulled out of class and really considered an afterthought. And there was a real struggle around how do we effectively educate these as though they needed to be separated and dealt with accordingly. I don't mean that in a punitive way, I just mean that there are just many educators and building leaders that have really struggled on what is a good practice, what's the best practice to go about doing this. So we have fully embraced the co-teaching model. While it may have lived primarily in the realm of special education, we have embraced this approach because our students are truly benefiting right now. We're seeing some really good gains in our district. And so when a child is at a point where they can continue to be integrated, why pull them out? Why not push in the other? We're not at a point, I don't think, in all of our classrooms where you can walk in and not know. But that's okay because this is a learning process. We still have many of our educators that are very uncomfortable. They've been, for much of their career, they have done it alone and sometimes, and many times, with the door closed. And so we are trying to knock down those walls where they're seeing more adults. People are in and out of a lot, me included. And how we go about providing professional development for our teachers is key, right? And so we've had some people really embrace this. We've had others say, no, not yet, I'm not ready. Some, I don't know if they will be ready anytime soon, but that's okay because this is the path, this is the way we're going. That's kind of where we are.
Yeah, thank you. And so I want to sort of shift focus to the early years, which are not, not necessarily covered by these regulations, and ask you what does exist, what supports are out there, or bilingual education, bilingual educational offerings exist for children before they arrive at school and for families as they're getting their kids ready for school. And then sort of connected to that, has any of this trickled down to the early years yet?
Right. So, bravo for New York, again, right? To, at least in New York City, we have what is essentially a new grade level because there's a PreK spot available to any child in New York City and expanding slowly across the state. So this is an incredible time to really watch what happens and to really kind of boost children's achievement. So because some of this, there's a lot of conversation about how are we going to do this. When we talk about 9% as the amount of children in the country that speak another language at home, you have to think that in the lower grades, the percentages of students who don't speak English is much, much higher. So the challenge to the teacher, the higher school system, is really daunting, right? Because there's going to be maybe 25% of your children who don't, who are learning English in school. So we're looking at what are the effective approaches? We know from child development research, from all sorts of research, neuroscience, that if we work with the child's home language, learning a fundamental skill that they have been developing, right? But at 4 years old, you're still developing the home language. So we have to pause and ask ourselves, how dangerous is it at 4 years old to enter a system where the one thing you've been building is suddenly, suddenly removed from you? And when the field talks about, that part of the problem with going to school and not encountering your language is that it's a subtractive thing, that it's something. Well, if you're doing that with children as they're developing language, there's this sense that that's worse than at other times, right? A sense that sort of placing our kids in peril. So we're looking at dual language models, and dual language has this sort of optimism in that it benefits the child who comes in speaking English, right, potentially in two-way bilingual models, and the child who's learning English. We're exploring at the earliest, what are the differences? What can we garner? Remember, we have big goals for these children, right? We have school readiness goals. We have oral language development. That, your reading is not going to come in, right? So all of these incredible goals and challenges suggest to us that we need to be working with the child's home language. So did we instantly triple the number of dual language programs? We certainly want to, and certainly advocates are working on that. But here's the challenge. We can accomplish that right away because we adults would have to start learning other languages, right? If we're going to be their educators. So that can't be our final thought, that when we build all dual language programs, we'll have done the right thing. We need to, every day, right? Every day, learn as educators, what do I do? What do I need to learn? What supports do I need in that child's home language to make the most of this opportunity? So if I sort of the thing that got most attention in early childhood, because this country has made a huge investment since the 1960s, right? When we first had 1965, when we first introduced Head Start. In New York in the 1960s, we introduced targeted pre-kindergarten and then universal pre-kindergarten. We've been giving this a lot of attention. And Head Start had that sort of, well, there's the fade out effects, right? That by third grade, we're not seeing the impact. And we learned from that you need to sustain supports. You don't just give them support and then drop it and expect those gains to be sustained. Well, we need to ask ourselves now, at this time, explosive expansion of pre-kindergarten, how do we protect against possible fade out if we don't support the home language? Because we know that that's where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck. So we've learned a lot already as a country, we've learned a lot as a state, so let's pay careful attention to that. We're trying, we're certainly trying.
Let's get back to the money, because I think that's a big deal, especially when you're talking about younger grades and younger grades where there's a smaller teacher-kid ratio, so you inevitably need more teachers there. So Roberto, I want to ask you if you can talk about what do you need and the extra money you need. I mean, there's sort of the dream and like bare minimum. Have you gotten what you need? And what should the state be doing to support you guys as you try to follow these new rules?
So there has been a financial impact on our district, not just Newburgh, but all districts who are really trying to do this as it was. So to date, we probably have spent close to $1.5 million just in teachers, and we're not done. We're still about 3 or 4 in order to have this fully implemented. But as a district, we committed to that. We felt like that was money to invest, because if not now, then when? Right? So we've truly taken the approach that on our watch, we're going to get this right. We're going to appreciate the leadership at the state level and their stewardship of trying to do this a different way. Let's change the paradigm and let's work on mindsets. And then there's money spent on resources. And then I think we need more support. It's coming. We just received some money for our 6th grade bilingual program. That is, so thank you to all those involved in that endeavor. It's training our teachers. So we have to build their capacity in order to do this at a high level. I think an maybe not unintended, but where we struggle, I don't know if I can put a dollar amount on this, but we struggle today trying to find certified bilingual teachers, and so that's a statewide cost. So what's going to change at the certification level? What's going to change at the university level to recruit more teachers to want to go down this career track? And that's not an easy, there is no answer to that, because in many respects, teachers are under attack. And many people are not going into the profession. And so I think that's another layer of difficulty on how to just be innovative and think outside the box, and that this has to come from the state around how to encourage our students who are in undergrad programs to want to consider going into teaching, specifically to teach that are ELLs.
Yeah, I'm going to throw it back to you, Angelica, because there are even if you move teachers around, right, there are real costs to the professional development, to redoing a university curriculum so that you don't just have, ELLs 101 that you take as an elective or whatever the case may be. So what are you guys, is it an unfinished
So it is not an unfunded mandate. When people say that, my hairs in the back of my neck stand up because, yeah, you did it here. But the point is that there is a heavier weight for ELLs in the state of New York. I don't think we can forget that. I do think that the shift does, it does have districts reallocate funding and look at it. And there might be a bigger cost, and there probably is. So there's a couple of things that we have done recently that are very important. And when you do this, it's not just about policy or instruction, it's also about advocacy, and everybody knows that. So we're lucky enough to have a board of regents that understands the importance of these students. And we just asked for $100 million. That was our budget ask from the governor's office. So if you have any connections or you know someone, make a phone call. Everywhere I go, I said, make that phone call. Make it 10 times if you have to, because we asked for that money. We wanted to go directly to the districts. Added money. We've also asked for dollars for the right assessments for these students, right? So we have been pushing that. We can't keep measuring the students with incorrect tools and then talk about achievement outcomes and results. So we've been very clear on that. We've also talked about what kind of resources we are going to continue to have for, and part of that is a curriculum that could be available in multiple languages, just the math that you mentioned, but also really looking at the different types of tools districts can use that will be free and open to them. But we are also paying for teachers to get certified. So we have a very robust teacher institute throughout that we pay for teachers to actually get certified in ESOL multilingual education. It's never enough. One of the things that we're doing is doing kind of hybrid models with online and in person so that we can reach more teachers. And we've looked at our certification practice and looked at different avenues for certification. We don't want to make the certification water it down. That's not what the outcome of this is. But looking at different pathways that make sense is what's on the table at this moment. So we have the funding ask, we have all these things that are happening, and we're also very willing to work with districts to look at innovative practice. One of the things that we're doing, we have professional development that we work with district superintendents, principals, teachers, as a team approach to really look at how to support this population. And we're now starting one this day on literacy for ELLs with Noni Oso from Harvard. So we're trying to be very strategic in professional development is expensive. If we can cover some of that cost for districts, we are more than happy to do that. We wanted this to be a partnership, and we want to move forward. What we see now is not sufficient, and we can imagine just from what we've seen today or yesterday with our possible new Secretary of Education that these kids are probably not going to be part of the priority, but that will not change for New York State. We're stepping, and we will ensure that that conversation continues at the national level.
One of the interesting things we've reported on is grow your own programs, where districts and schools are growing their own teachers out of their alumni, which is a really interesting thing. You do it in a meaningful way, and you all are doing something, asking for new testing. I would like to just talk a little bit about what you hope that will look like, and then turn it to Roberto and Zoila.
About the instruction we deliver. And so the same way we do for our monolingual students, right? So our kids, just like every other district across the state, are required to take a
Looking at our data and not really looking at collectively, because I know that people do it regionally, but as a collective body, to really have a political advocacy agenda. We get phone calls every day about, how do I help these kids? What can I do? Those calls also need to go elsewhere. You know, these are the things that we need to get this done. These are our kids. How can we be successful as a state? So I think that we need to sit with the right people, with the decision makers, to express to them and show them these are the kids that we have before us, and these are their strengths. These are the things that they bring to the table. And in order for us to continue to move the agenda, we need X, Y, and Z from you in order for you to be elected again.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and it's not a easy one to answer. But you know, I'm the number one cheerleader for my district. I'm number one, and so I'm here tonight. Tomorrow, I'll be in the community, leading a kickoff session around what equity really looks like, because unfortunately, it's not defined the same way for a lot of people. And I think one of the points in your question around how to allocate resources, one of the things that we're going to be putting forward to our community is we have to re-examine that, right? And so unfortunately, in Newburgh and many other places, when people talk about equity, they're really talking about equality. And we have to quickly move away from that notion. So this is not about every one of our schools getting the same resources, but how do we reallocate and give resources in a way where each of the schools get what they need. And that's a paradigm shift that's not easy, and it's going to take us some time to plow through that, but it's necessary. Just today, I placed calls into our local politicians to talk about these state aid runs, because I have a lot of questions. Newburgh, over the last 5 years, has already been shortchanged close to $50 million. And so last year, I testified in a lawsuit against the state regarding this matter, that we're not getting our fair share of funds in order to do what we're tasked to do. And so for me, it's not about throwing new money at the issue. This is about reallocating the resources from the state, and then certainly at my level, and with the budget that I manage, reallocating accordingly, based on how we're defining equity in our district.
I would also add to that a lot of the advocacy work is on, as you mentioned, getting people to understand the difference between equity and equality, and to make equity a persistent part of the conversation, shameless agitation kind of thing. Because when we can talk about equity, and when all of us own it, not just black and brown students or children or teachers, when all of us own it, I think it begins to clarify what the hard decisions are and what our role is in those decisions. The other thing I think we need to do is we need to band together and say, I'm not giving up I'm not going to give up the thing that I'm not interested in, right? And if I'm an early childhood person, I'm not going to give up the high school folk because I'm only interested in early childhood and sort of defend my slice of the pie. Because we're talking about human beings, right? We're talking about students and children. So those two things, that we persist with equity. Sometimes that's not a popular topic, and sort of there can be this idea that aren't we past that? Aren't we past talking about equity? Like we're post-equity? No, we're not. But to persist with that topic and to say we own all the services, not our favorite ones, not the ones that we're dedicated to, not the ones we work in, but we own them all. And then once we have that, sort of our heads wrapped around that, take it to the streets.
Other questions?
Hello everyone. I have a question related to outside activities, not just in the class. Are there any policies or programs that engage kids, not just inside classrooms, but also in extracurricular activities to develop their skill sets and knowledge and other things? Because I very crucial part of this holistic approach.
If you're saying outside of the classroom, like extracurricular, absolutely. So whatever the district has is open to all kids, especially these kids, and we've made that very clear, and we made it a very public statement that you're not just doing the basics, but what you have to do is everything else the kids have to have access to. Because what was happening was that the kids were getting the basics and that's it. So you have that, you don't need to be part of the fine arts program or whatever other programs were happening in the districts. And we were very clear that that was illegal in our state and that kids needed to be part of that, everything that happens within the district. One of the other things is kind of the mind shift of less, we have this idea of giving these kids less is better. Let's give them less language, let's not speak to them in these big sentences, let's not give them too much because we're going to overwhelm them. But that makes no sense, right? We expose kids to things, we open up their world. That's our job. Our job is to do that, to make sure that they have access to all those things. And I think that's a mind shift for all of us. Because I will tell you that it's not an easy thing to convince people that you give more than less. But also targeted, because you could throw 100 things at kids and it doesn't make any sense. But what does that look like? And I think that's our responsibility as a community and as a state. And I will let the districts that are actually doing those things talk to you a little bit about that.
So we have a plethora of programs that take place after school that are open to all kids. And so one thing we want to make sure is that our ELLs have access to these programs. So while we do have programs that are open to all kids, we are being very intentional and strategic about programs just for these kids as well, so that way they have additional time to practice their language, to engage in the various programs we have across the district. And so we offer programs both on Saturdays and after school.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm Karen Nemeth. I'm an author, consultant. I've worked with programs all over the country on preschool. The past few weeks, I've been at Head Start of Eastern Orange County in Newburgh, New York, and tomorrow I'm on my way to work with the National Boasting Early Childhood Educator. So we have a lot of great things that I can spread around in that work. But one thing I haven't heard yet I'd like to know about is how are you leveraging the existing organizations that are out there working with your populations that you're talking about to share the resources you're offering and to use the resources they may have that you haven't brought to bear yet, like partnering with the New York State chapters of NABE, New York State chapter of TESOL, New York State chapter of NAUIC, and that kind of thing.
So we don't do any of this work without partnering, right? Because we talked about funding. So New York State Ed, our staffing is 0 to, we have 8 people doing this work for 730 districts. So we can't do any of this work without partnering with organizations, with higher ed, with everyone that does this work. That is the only way we know how to operate. So when we come together to identify places that we need to grow and in the direction we need to move in, we do it as a collective force. But that's why I said earlier, when we have to have this political agenda, but everything that we do has to be collective. Because we can't, many times we spend a lot of time trying to say, well, but we're doing this different than them. No, we don't have time for that. There's a sense of urgency around this work, and there's a sense of moving beyond that. And Soila said that maybe people feel that we're beyond the equity conversation. We're not beyond anything at this point, right? I think that we have to figure out how we work together in a more collective manner and put aside our personal interests. And that's a very difficult thing to do. Even for advocacy groups, for educators, it's something that we have to look at the goal a little differently. And so to answer your question, we do, and we continue to, and if you know of other places that we have not touched, we're more than welcome to work with them.
I just want to also comment that I am also a member of the New York State Association for Bilingual Education. So looking at it from the other side, How we partner with the state, I want to say first of all that we know that we've always got an open door, and that's already remarkable. Who can say that about being able to access highest level policymakers in the state? And what we do is we gather, this is what we feel we can offer to the process, gather information from the field or from other experts in the field and provide things like position statements or provide moments in time where people can comment on what is happening, disseminate information with the urging of how important it is, and then offer ourselves up as support as well. So I can say that we see the partnership from the other side, and it is absolutely true.
Time for one more question?
Yeah.
Thank you. So I do want to thank you, and I do think it's really a nice moment to celebrate everything that New York State has accomplished, thanks to, in large part, thanks to a lot of the people in this room, especially Angelica, Lisette, and Regent Reyes, and everybody else. I mean, this has been a really positive period. But I have to ask the question, I don't think we can end tonight without noticing that we're in the middle of like Armageddon here, which is, I mean, this is basically a presidential campaign that was won on anti-immigrant sentiment. And I can't leave that untouched right now. And so my question for you three is, from where you sit, what do you predict that a Trump presidency means for the education for bilingual education policy and the education of immigrant kids in the state?
I'll start off by saying, in November, when the election results came in, the following day I was confronted with a number of phone calls and emails from parents and from educators saying that, this was towards the end of the following day, that they had grave concerns because the children who came in that day that weren't born in this country, and we do have several undocumented youth in our district, were scared. Didn't want to come to school anymore. Were asking questions like, so what's going to happen to me now? I have many colleagues in California, and when I talked to them, they were confronted with the very same thing. Crying, wanting to know why this was happening to them and who in their family was going to be taken away. And so as a district, we, that hurt my core to know that we would have children coming in crying and scared, not knowing what was going to happen to them. And so we distributed some information to our educators around how to have these very difficult conversations and to assure children that we love them and that we were going to fight for them and that they were going to be okay. And so I think to just directly answer your question, it just means that all of us in this room and those not in this room, we have to use this time to strongly advocate and stand up for what we know is right and to not be quiet. And I think for far too long, people have just gone along, they've gone through the motions, and this is not one of those times when that can happen. And so if there's ever a time to use your voice and to advocate, it's now.
I think for us at the state level, we're lucky because we have a chancellor and board of regents that's committed to this population, and nothing is going to change that, right? We have a governor that went out and said New York State is a safe place for immigrants. So what changes will come? We don't know, right? There's a lot of anxiety around that. But I think, well, I shouldn't say I think, I know that New York State will only advocate and push for our kids, right? All our kids. So that's not going to change. Our vision is not going to change. Our commitment is not going to change. It actually has increased. The moment that that election happened, that has been ramped up. And people that we might not have had conversations before with, we are having right now. Even if it's painful, we're having. Because we can't, and it's difficult. It's a difficult place that we're in right now because many times we want to shut some conversations down, but you have to continue to have the conversation. and hope that people hear it, and if they don't, we keep moving forward. That's what this is all about. We keep moving forward. Our vision is strong and it's unwavering, and so is our commitment. But there are a lot of advocates in the room. And every time I get some piece of information, I start shooting it out to all my advocate friends. I was like, all right, what are we gonna do? You know, we're a collective force, and New York is a force to be reckoned with, right? And we're gonna demonstrate that more now than ever. So we're counting on all of you to really support us, and for us to make sure that we stand strong and support your vision, the kids, the districts, the principals, and the teachers. There's no other way to do it.
Thank you, Angelica, and I've been told to cut it off there, but I know a lot of you probably like me have several more questions that are burning, and so now we get to go drink wine and beer and talk amongst ourselves and ask each other more questions. Thank you so much to the panel for this conversation. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing? I would be remiss if I do not acknowledge Ms. Colomb Collins, who's our Assistant Commissioner for Bilingual Educational Welfare.
And I want to thank Janie for bringing us all together and for her really fascinating report. If you haven't read it all, you should. It's a very easy read. And I'm an editor, so I know. So thank you all.